The opinions and statements expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of WWDB, its staff, or management.
Entrepreneur, author, and financial consultant Mark Bernstein helps high-performing entrepreneurial business owners create a vision for the future and follow through on their goals and intentions. Ange Honorato is a business growth strategist who blends psychology and business together to create conscious leaders and business owners who impact the world. Founders Forum is a radio show podcast sharing the real stories behind entrepreneurship as founders discover more about themselves while providing valuable lessons and some fun and entertainment for you. Now, here's Mark and Ange.
Good morning, world. Good morning, America. Good morning, Philadelphia. This is Founders Forum, and I'm here with my co-host, Ange Honorato, and we have a very interesting guest today, Glenna Crooks. And you're going to learn more about her in a minute. But before we start, we had an interesting morning. Ange, you particularly had an interesting morning. And it's going to be the topic that we're going to talk about is a little bit about how people receive care, especially as they age. And I know your issue is directly related to that. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a topic that is probably near and dear to many people's hearts these days, and as we were talking offline, as Glenna mentioned, I think it is a real sleeper issue for, not just companies, but families and the environment at whole is how do we conduct our lives and still take great care of our elders, right, on top of everything else, and do it in a way that is respectful and of them, but also allows us to kind of live life. And it's very challenging when you have last-minute changes and needs and commitments and you're pulled in 10 different directions. So
part of my personal story is we just lost my mother-in-law, who was 100.5. She was, 101 insurance age. It's closer to her nearest birthday. And, she lived a long life, but she was in a life care facility that started as independent living, then went to assisted living, and then to skilled nursing. And my wife was really, for 20 years, was a big part of that. And it consumed a lot of her energy and attention, and it also creates that much bigger a loss when suddenly it's like she lost a job, in a sense too.
Yeah, there's part of your routine is gone as well.
And Glenna, I know you've dealt with a lot of that recently as well. This is a good time to get into it before we actually introduce you, but you want to comment on that aspect and personally what you've been through with that?
Yes, and my brother and I and my sister-in-law, the three of us who collaborated really well in caring for my mother, have actually put together a kind of a presentation that we've done about the things that we wish we had known, that we learned along the way. I mean, if anybody should have been able to do it, it should have been us. My brother and sister-in-law were hospice volunteers for 20 years, going to nursing homes and into people's homes and so on. I have similar experiences, not that long, but I have professional experiences. In fact, I've received an award for the network work that I've done applied to Alzheimer's caregivers. So I thought we knew the ropes, and it turns out it's a different kettle of fish when you're doing it yourself.
So we're going to talk about your brand, Network Sage, and you have a book out by that name, and the Network Sage Coach is a website that people can find out more about you, but you have a very interesting background. Let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are, and then we'll talk exactly about what the network is and what that means and what you're doing today.
Sure, glad to. I'm in my 8th career, and what each one of them has in common is that I've organized chaos and I've solved complicated problems. I started out in healthcare as a school psychologist, and it was during that time, it was seeing the needs of children and how by the time I saw them and they were 5 or 6 years old, I felt like it was just too late. After 3 years, I went back to graduate school and did an interdisciplinary PhD, but principally focusing on healthcare because that was the system that would first impact the life of a child. Once I was in healthcare, it was so fascinating and so chaotic that I never went back to education because there was just so much rich opportunity there in healthcare. So it was healthcare that gave me the opportunity to work in the public sector. I was an appointee of President Reagan, responsible for health policy in the nation during that time, but then also in the private sector both with professional associations like pharmacists and physicians, but also at Merck during the years that Merck was the most admired corporation in America. I came initially to start their public policy operations, first in the U.S. and then globally. But then we made the decision as a corporation to take our, what was at the time very small, vaccine business, pull it out of the pharma business, and create a dedicated division of its own. So I was sent over to help do that and became the global vice president of Merck's vaccine business. Now, the reason that I transitioned to the entrepreneurial world and created my own firm is that the 3 years that I was in the vaccine business, I had to globalize it. I had offices on 5 continents. I went to each one of them once a quarter. I thought nothing of 24 hours on an airplane. Now, most of this time was before we had much of a web. So there was a lot of demand, and no surprise, I burned out. So I left and became a consultant then to businesses and governments, drawing on all of the experiences that I'd had during my career to advise them and solve problems.
Just a quick note, that was probably a great break that you didn't have to be the vaccine czar in 2020, I would think. Or had you wished you'd been there to do that?
Well, here would be my comment. I think that there were magnificent and wonderful things that happened. Project Warp Speed was one of them, and they deserve a Nobel Prize. I don't know which one. I don't know if it should be for economics or peace or medicine, but they deserve one. Unfortunately, I think where we fell down was on the distribution side, because we disrupted all the trusted channels that we've already built in healthcare. And by the way, I understand why they made that decision. And if it had happened on my watch and I'd had to do it, I would have made the same decision. And that's because I didn't understand how it worked on the ground. But having been at Merck in the business and really understanding the detail of how all that worked would have brought me to a different decision. I only wish somebody with my insights had been at the table.
So now we're back at Merck. By the way, since you mentioned you were a political appointee, we talked about it earlier, just a really quick, interesting story, how you almost became a senator from Indiana, and in my theory was perhaps the first female vice president. But anyway, but do you want to tell that story real quickly?
Well, I had left the administration. I was just by a few weeks, and I come from a district in Indiana where there had been a very contentious race. And the Democrat was seated. The Republican candidate just didn't want to go through that again. So I was asked to come home and run for Congress from my home district. The idea of the leaders in the party at the time is that I'd be in the House for 2 terms, and then it would be 1992, which back in the mid to late 80s, they were predicting would be the year of the woman. They were right. So they said in 92, Dan Quayle intends to retire from politics and go home and run the family business. We'll run you for Dan's seat and you'll win. I took a hard look at politics, and I realized I was just not cut out for it. I like policy. Right. I like thinking big thoughts and working behind the scenes. I have a hard time being out front that much, although I have to do it more and more. And so that's where I wanted to spend my time. I think it was the absolute right decision for me.
Great. So I thought it was an interesting story. And we also talked a little bit before about politics versus policy and that distinction. So now you're at Merck. What happens next?
Well, so I was at Merck. The last thing I did for Merck was go to South Africa for 3 weeks when Mr. Mandela became president, and reopened our business there. That was actually the first.
There's a little Forrest Gump in you. You seem to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and that was the first time, by the way, that I realized how respected Reagan was outside the country. And when the Mandela government found out that I was in country, they asked me to stay for a while and to help them figure out how their public health system would work. They were very intrigued at the relationship between our federal and our state governments. So I reopened our business, got our products registered, got tender offers in to sell, and really experienced the country at a point where the hope was palpable. I mean, you could just see it ready to sort of explode and grow. So As I said, I left soon after that and created my own business. I stayed here in the Philadelphia area because there's so much pharma in this corridor. And that really also gave me a wonderful opportunity to meet a lot of really talented people. That's another thing that's been a blessing in my career, is worked with incredible people who were really dedicated and who wanted to make a difference. And I still do some of that, although in 2005, because of what my clients were telling me, I started a whole new field of research.
And let's talk about that. What was that?
So here's what's happened. You know how it is, you work a long day with people, you have a long dinner, especially those late night European dinners, and they have their second glass of wine and they let their hair down. And what they started telling me was that life was just too complicated and they couldn't do it anymore. And they wanted to quit. Now, some wanted to quit a job. Some wanted to quit a marriage. Some wanted to quit both. And I thought, oh, that would be a horrible thing to happen. I mean, they were talented, energetic, very well educated, very dedicated people. Some of them had literally millions and billions of dollars at their disposal to do good things in the world. And I don't know about you, but I think we've got lots of problems in the world, and I want all hands on deck.
No, I think everything's great.
So I went looking for a solution. Now, including revisiting a lot of things I had done over the years. I mean, I didn't just do yoga and meditation. I trained to be a teacher. I didn't just do 7 Habits. I did Covey 7 Habits with Covey himself twice.
It's a fraternity brother of mine who I never met, but
he's a genius.
Yeah, I know.
Just a genius.
He's great. His work's great.
But, you know, everything eventually kind of ran out of gas.
So you're all in. Anything you do, you're all in.
Yeah, I'm all in.
That's what I've learned. Yeah, that's great.
So that's when 2007 came, and I noticed the solution in a very unlikely place. It was a fashion magazine from a very unlikely person, Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, one of my favorites.
You know, everybody's. And
Great story.
so what had happened was I had just seen the trailer for the first Iron Man. That had just dropped. Well, I happen to like action flicks and superheroes. So I think that's why I even noticed this interview, because I don't read interviews in fashion magazines generally. Now, in it, he said he had a pit crew of people helping him out. A yoga teacher, a sensei, a psychiatrist. He said, but I need a pit crew because after all, I'm not a Model T, I'm a Ferrari. And it takes more of a pit crew to keep us on the road. It's clear I was in a snarky mood that day because I thought to myself, Buster, if you're a Ferrari, I'm at least a Maserati. And so is everybody else I know, by the way.
Right.
But you're right. It does take a pit crew. Who's mine? And how are they doing? And then after a while, I thought, uh-oh, I'm on other people's pit crews. How am I doing?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So without realizing it, I had looked at pit crews before, but only for my business. I had my own consultant.
You didn't call it pit crews at that point.
No, I
right?
didn't.
Yeah.
I had looked at and I had a consultant for my business. I had gotten to one of those inflection points. And she said, well, why don't you make a list of everybody you have to manage in order to have this business? Well, there were 150 people on that list. Now, that wasn't internal. We were a small, niche firm. We never had more than 6 people in the company. But all of those other people were my clients or their bosses or their customers they wanted me to work with. But I hadn't looked at my personal life. So I put a blank sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. And as people's names came to me, I wrote them down. I quit when I got to about 147. I thought I was done. Turns out I forgot the guy who plowed the driveway. It wasn't winter. I forgot about my accountant. It wasn't tax season, right? And my first thought was, am I high maintenance or what? And then I realized the problem my clients had instantly. Because compared to them, I have a simple life. I don't have a spouse, so there's no in-laws or friends or colleagues on my list of my spouse. I don't have kids, so no teachers or coaches or other soccer moms or orthodontists. My elderly mom was healthy at the time. She didn't need me for anything but fun and love. I didn't have a dog. I didn't even have a cat. So my clients' lives were far more complicated than mine, and I started to see the glimmer of some solutions. So I found some solutions for myself, and I became my own laboratory. I changed a number of things. People noticed that I was different. My income went up. My health got better. I had more time for friends. And so people wanted to know what I was doing. And when I told them, it worked for them too. So that's what made me realize this wasn't just idiosyncratic to me. There were some general principles here, and that maybe I could understand and mine that for value for my clients.
We need to take a short break, and this would be a great time to come back and talk a lot more about what that means.
The lawyers at Kaplan, Stewart, Meloff, Reiter, and Stein PC understand the needs of small businesses. They deliver high-quality legal services and exceptional value to their clients every day. Their experienced legal team provides clients with guidance in many areas of the law, including real estate, land use and zoning, construction, business, civil litigation, estates and trusts, and employment matters. Kaplan Stewart also has cutting-edge technology to make the practice of law as efficient as possible. Call 610-260-6000 to schedule a consultation. Kaplan, Stewart, Meloff, Reiter, and Stein PC. Business lawyers for business people.
So we're talking about pit crews and networks, and let's talk about what that all meant to you and to the people you were talking to and ultimately your clients.
Yeah, well, let me cut to the chase. So the top line was I went and did 10 years of deep ethnographic research with people ranging in age from 7 to 87, although my 87-year-old is now about 93. We're following her longitudinally, and looking at their lives and all the people in it. Out of that, I started to notice patterns, and here's what's emerged. We have two major types of networks in our life. Some I call life networks, and these are enduring. I'll talk about those more. But first, let me talk about the other type, which are the event networks. Now, the event networks are the people who come into your life because of a particular event, and most people have had these, so they'll know what I mean. You have a wedding. People come and help you have a wedding. You buy a house. You have a baby. You have a car accident. You need surgery. I mean, all of those are events. People come in who are specialists in that field. They help you through that, and then you're on your way. Maybe one or two will stay around. Like maybe you really did like your wedding photographer, and they'll take your holiday picture every year. But
they're basically temporary networks.
They're temporary. Yeah. Now the life networks, the one that I call that I say are enduring, there are 8 of them altogether. 5 I call birthright networks because parents create them for children. This is so intuitive. It's just hiding in plain sight, all right? So a family network, 2nd, a health and vitality network, 3rd, an education and enrichment network, 4th, a spiritual network, and 5th, a social and community network. It kind of makes sense, right? It's there. I mean, a 7-year-old can understand this when you show it to them. Now, from a very young age, you start changing these networks to suit you, all right? But you will always need the functions that those networks are built to provide for your entire life. Then you mature into 3 more that I call coming-of-age networks for that reason. First, a career network. That's the place we think about networking, but actually we're networking everywhere. A home and personal affairs network. Personal affairs being things like your car dealer, your banker, your lawyer, your accountant, your financial planner, your estate planners, people like that. And then finally, a network I did not go looking for, but they kept showing up. They're ghosts, I call them. Ghosts are people who used to be in your life, who are no longer. And what we know is that everyone who comes into your life does make an impression on you, sometimes in good ways and sometimes not. But they make an impression. And so that's helpful for people to know as well. And people do want that information, or it wouldn't have been part of my architecture of networks. They kept asking me about these people. So those are the 8 networks. And when you understand that, it gives you a framework for thinking about your life in a different way. And I like to think about this as human capital, and I like to relate it to the financial side. Imagine that on the financial side, we didn't have spreadsheets and programs and advisors and banks and investment opportunities and so on. We had no idea what was coming in, what was going out. Are we optimizing it? Imagine that on the money side of our lives. Well, that's where we are on the human capital side of our life. The best tools that we have are alphabetical, archived in our phone or Outlook database, but they're not helpful often time because they don't, for one thing, they don't tell us who might be missing, which is one of the things when I work with people I watch for and always find. And I'll just mention one. 70% of adult Americans don't have an up-to-date will. Mm-hmm. So that means either they don't have an attorney or they don't have the right one. Now, the other thing is that an Outlook database won't remind you to fill a role that you was somebody you may have lost. So one young man I worked with recently, his dentist retired 3 years ago. Nothing prompted him to replace his dentist, so he hasn't seen one in 3 years. So that's another way that the tools we currently have just aren't much of as much use to us as we need them to be.
I just need to mention, because of my business, we're always helping people with estate planning and wills, and I'm an attorney by background, so I had a lot of clients that were attorneys because that was my natural network. And my informal study was that I could tell if I'm sitting across from you like I am, and we talk about wills, I could tell by the color of their faces whether they had one or not. It got to that point. And my informal survey said 50% of those attorneys didn't have wills. Think about that.
That's the shoemaker's kids don't have shoes,
right?
Syndrome. And I just love, I normally, Mark knows I love to talk, but I've been so mesmerized by your conversation that
it's true. You've been very quiet.
Yeah, I'm just absorbing all of it. I think what I love about what you're bringing up, and it's something on a smaller scale that I've started to kind of adopt and promote to other folks in my world too, is about creating that power team. I love that you even call it a pit crew, because a pit crew I think is even more detailed to what it is, because they're different people and different functions that all come together to kind of get that one thing launched, right? But I think it's a fascinating concept of what you're bringing, because I don't think that the everyday person even gives themselves enough grace or understanding that, hey, I am my own little self-leadership. I'm my own little company. I'm my own little domain. And without that support, I think that's where stress and overwhelm and depression and addiction and all those things kind of explode, because we're just overwhelmed.
Exactly. And what I'll tell you is all those clients that I had who said they wanted to leave a job or a marriage, when we did this exercise with them, none of them did. They all looked at the network maps we created and the data, and they said, that's not where the problem was. I was placing the blame on my job or my boss or my spouse when the problem was other places, and I didn't even realize it. So to the degree...
Well, and I'm sure they realized the cost of the disruption by leaving their job or their marriage when they understood how significant their network is that involved in that, I would think, as well.
Actually, no one talked about that.
No?
No. What it did was it gave them insights that they just didn't have before. When this one woman realized she had adopted 2 children, they both ended up, as they grew up, having special needs. She was managing 47 people for just one of her kids. She had left a Madison Avenue advertising firm to create her own marketing business. And when we talked, she said, I haven't worked in my own business in 6 months. And she said, now I understand why. And every time she said there's a crisis, I'm the one that falls off my list. So just seeing that data allowed her to make 3 or 4 very important decisions, which got her son on a better track, reduced that number down to 8, and allowed her to go back to her business.
We have only a few minutes left, believe it or not, and I have one question for you. If you looked out 3 years from now, I like to ask this to a lot of people, and what would those 3 years look like to have been successful for you? In other words, what's your vision for the next few years?
Yeah. I've known from the beginning that in order to really optimize human capital and help people see this data, we were going to need a platform, an app. much like you might have in the financial world. You need the app. So I have created something that is the human capital equivalent of fintech. I have self-funded it, but can't do that any longer. And I have decided, actually, that I don't personally want to build another company. I build so many and foundations. I don't want to build it. I want to be the subject matter expert. So I am looking for a business partner that is a company that knows data, the power of data, because the data that this app will collect is data that cannot be gotten any other way, and that wants to build out the rest of this platform and optimize this data, not just for every individual user, but for our understanding of populations, so that we can bring more of these insights to the world and create better public policies, better care vehicles, and all kinds of other things that will help people to make this world a better place.
So in 3 years, you will make good on your intention to have a partner. This
Yep.
thing will be up and running, and it sounds very exciting. One last thing on a lighter note, we have a little bit of music involved in the show, and I know you're a music fan. If you had to name your favorite artist or favorite album or favorite song, pick one.
Well, it would be Pharrell Williams' Happy.
Oh, great one. That's a great one.
I mean, if you're in a down mood, just
How can you not?
put that on repeat and go.
Your foot's going to tap. Your energy is going to just emerge. And, I'm sitting here, as I said, I'm completely mesmerized. There's so many, I think you underestimated when you said you've had 8 careers, because I feel like the things you've done, the things you've seen, the impact that you've made, the way that you've so eloquently tied them together is unbelievable. So I'm going to just go on record right now and say I think we need a part 2. I think we need a part 2 of this visit. So if you're open to that, I would love to have you back again, because I think we're just scratching the surface of what you can do and bring to our listeners and the world.
I would love to.
That would be great, because there is a lot we didn't cover today. So, Glenna, we will make a date, and we'll have you back here, and we'll do it again. Thanks so much for being here, Glenna Crooks. She has a lot to teach us all. And thank you for being here this week on Founders Forum. And we will see you again next week.
We hope you enjoyed your time with Founders Forum today and you found value to take with you throughout your day. Join us again next week for another episode of Founders Forum on WWDB Talk Radio, and always at the Founders Forum show page at WWDBAM.com.